Ladies, my name is Mark Wallace. I'm the Chief Executive of Total Politics Group. A very warm welcome to this event, Rebuilding Ukraine. How can the UK use trade to support Ukraine's post-conflict economic growth? Held by Conservative Home, kindly and gratefully in partnership with ACOM. I need to open with an apology. I'm very sorry for being delayed, having got caught in the queue at the media entrance, slightly inspired by someone in the media who remained nameless, attempting to commit a Phil and Holly, which led the police to stop letting people in. I'm not going to go into who it was, but my great apologies for keeping our panellists and audience waiting today. I'm sure it may be. we shall see. But my apologies. Thank you for bearing with me for this incredibly important and topical discussion with an illustrious and expert panel. First, I think to set the scene on today's event, I'd like to welcome, and I hope you'll enjoy watching, a message from Alexei Goncharenko, a prominent member of the Ukrainian Parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, to set the scene and give some illustration of quite why it's so essential that we're talking about this crucial topic today.
Hello, my name is Alexei Goncharenko, member of the Parliament of Ukraine, and I am happy to join you online. I would be happy to join you in person. Unfortunately, I couldn't do this this time, but I join you from Odessa, Ukraine, and I want to show you the most vivid, always it was the most vivid place of our city, the port. You can see it here. And also you can see here is the hotel, which was destroyed by Russian missile attack just days ago. And again, Russians, they attacked our port because that is the most important for them, to stop Ukrainian agricultural export and in general to close the Black Sea. Odessa is the biggest city on the shore of the Black Sea, and the consequences of Russian blockade of the Black Sea, the whole world feels. So the theme of today's meeting is rebuilding Ukraine, and what can be done by UK government and United Kingdom, which already showed leadership in military support of our country, to show leadership in rebuilding of our country. There are three things which I want you to do and to help us with. Number one is to open the Black Sea. From the times of ancient Greeks, the Black Sea and area is a breadbasket of the world. Today Russia blocked the Black Sea and millions of people in the world suffer. According to estimations of United Nations, 400 million people throughout the whole planet are dependent from the calories from Ukrainian crops. Just imagine this number, 400 million people. That's something we should do immediately. And the United Kingdom has unique capacity to help us with, because United Kingdom is one of the strongest navies in the world on the one hand, and also United Kingdom is the insurance hub of the world, especially in maritime. So that is so important. Help us to open the Black Sea, not just for grain, but also for metal, other goods. That's what's needed by the whole world. Help us with this. Number two, give please guarantees to UK business in order to help them to come to Ukraine now, to make business now, to build factories, to invest in Ukraine now, because that's what we need right now. In general, that's the most important. To help Ukraine is to help us to be self-sufficient, like with the Black Sea, like with the opening of our trade, like with making alive this port, which is famous throughout the whole planet. So guarantees to UK business in order for them to come to Ukraine. And definitely, what else can be done by the United Kingdom? And one more thing, we need your expertise. We need your expertise in creating the friendly environment for business and investments in our country. Rule of law, democracy, that's what we need. And that is very important because unfortunately we have a lot to do in these areas too. And the friendly environment, the good environment for business is something we really need. And UK can help us in this. So three things: open the Black Sea, give guarantees to UK business to invest to Ukraine now, and help us with your expertise in rule of law, in democracy. That's what we need from the UK, from the United Kingdom today. Thank you. Hello from Odessa, Alexei Goncharenko, member of the Parliament of Ukraine.
Well, An all too vivid illustration there, and I think it's extremely appropriate that we are here in this room in Manchester discussing this in a UK political and policy setting, but that we have that reach from this message direct from Odessa into this room in the same way that we've seen Vladimir Putin's latest war in Ukraine reach into every single aspect of our politics, of our economy, and of course, most importantly, I think finally present this challenge for people in the West to stop talking about Eastern Europe, Ukraine and others as being the flank of the West, as being the eastern flank of democracy, as being the eastern flank of the free world. This is the front line, not the eastern flank. And I think that's all too vivid in what's been happening in Ukraine. The UK, of course, has led the world, proudly and rightly so, in providing essential military support prior to Vladimir Putin's latest invasion, in training many thousands of Ukrainian troops. Immediately in the run-up to the crisis, by making key decisions to ensure that NLAWs and other weaponry and military aid was sent as fast as possible to play that crucial role in the early days of helping the Ukrainian military and Ukrainian people to stave off that supposed that apparent intention of a 3-day war on the part of Russia's tyranny. And it's continued to play a key role during the war so far in ensuring further military aid and proper support. But this discussion is intended, I think, to represent a key development in what happens next in terms of making sure that there is that trade support, making sure that there are those financial guarantees and support for business to grow, for infrastructure to be redeveloped, in order to help Ukraine not just survive but to win this war, but then to go on to rebuild and recover as fast as possible after it, in order to make sure that it can build itself into the society that its young people are fighting and dying every day for the dream of, which is a free, successful, wealthy Ukraine, which can continue to be an ally of this country and others, and then thrive to enjoy the full potential which Russia has sought so much to snuff out. So we have a fantastic panel who have a great deal of more expertise in this than I do. And so without further delay, I hope you'll join me in welcoming our first speaker, Jim Bowden, Head of Strategy and Growth at AECOM. He's a former brigadier with the Royal Engineers. He served in the Falkland Islands, Northern Ireland, the Balkans and Iraq. If you think an event like this is nerve-wracking for some people, he previously delivered military engineering bomb disposal, which probably gives him probably exactly the right stuff needed to deal with when people stand up with a microphone to find out what question it's going to be. So please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Nothing like being teed up to fail at the outset. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a real pleasure to represent AECOM, but actually probably to represent industry and part of the sort of partnership that I'm absolutely certain will be vital to rebuilding Ukraine. So I'm speaking as somebody from industry, I think, speaking from a military background in terms of reconstruction, and I'm also speaking, if it's of interest, as the chair of a veterans charity, which I think is going to be pivotal in terms of the people of Ukraine going forward. We often forget that it's not just about the infrastructure, it's about the people that are pivotal to that. This is absolutely the right time to be having this conversation. Getting ready in anticipation of something is so much more effective than doing it after the event, and I think the UK has a really tremendous opportunity to make a significant difference, and I'll touch on that later. So AECOM, for those that don't know, one of the world's largest engineering companies. It's global, covers everything in terms of sectors and work, and I think the most important thing is that it's there to help sort and work through complex challenges, which is what we specialise in, and alongside a whole host of other partners that we work with, and indeed competitors or competitor mates, if you prefer. There is an enormous wealth of talent and ability in the UK and more widely. Looking towards where the Ukraine may be needing support, it's absolutely critical and obvious to me that it's a long-term programmatic approach, which is a shared activity. I think the difference between perhaps some of my previous experience and now is this is not a failed state. Arguably, it's probably the most successful, most functioning, most effective state that I've seen in a very long time, given we in the West often struggle to do to keep the lights on and do things that we're doing now. We don't have a war to fight, and they're doing that and fighting a war, and I wager winning a war. So it's a different set of events. I think my next point would be this is not a short-term activity. This is a generational, if not multi-generational, and therefore where I think industry will be looking to government is beyond government, is beyond party. It's about continuity, it's about consistency, and it's about putting in place things now that will last the next 10, 20, 30 years. So it's got to be above and beyond the day-to-day issues. And if we can get that right, then we're in a tremendous position. I mean, we've had the privilege and the honour of signing a number of memorandum of understanding with various Ukrainian ministries, and we're working with them to start to understand and scope the problem. And it's interesting, the more you do, the more complicated it gets, the more complex it gets. And if you're not careful, quite rightly, but sometimes quite wrongly, due process and due diligence gets in the way of making progress. So we've got to find that kind of compromise. It is clear to me already, and I think it will be clear to many people in the room, that we do need good and effective governance. If you want to attract people to invest and you want to attract people to work, then it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be open, and it needs to be visible. And as the opening speaker made the point, there are some issues there, and we shouldn't shy away from those, and we should face up to those. I think where the UK could make a contribution and will make a contribution is through the use of UK standards and UK institutions. They are globally recognised as the best in the world, and they shape the way we work. They shape competition, they shape design, they shape the development of almost everything. And if we could make that play, and we could work with the Ukrainians on that, that would be tremendous. So I think we can offer, as can many other industry partners, technical expertise, standards, skills, and global expertise. We've established already great relationships with the Ukrainian government, with Ukrainian industry, with partner industries. We need to do more on SMEs and the supply chain and work on that, but I think everybody does. And we also have a very strong and positive relationship with the UK government, and we're just chatting before about sponsoring an event in Warsaw to help bring Polish people together, UK, Ukrainian, into a forum where they can have conversations and have some dialogue, and we're delighted to do that. So I think in closing, huge challenge, absolutely the right time, and we in industry and ACOM are here to help integrate and support wherever we can.
Thank you very much, Jim. And now we'll hear from the first of two members of Parliament, members of the UK Parliament, on our panel. Nusrat Ghani will be familiar to many of you, a great and long-standing friend to Conservative Home, I'm pleased to say, MP for Wealden since 2015, and she's now the Minister for Industry and Economic Security. So I think, having heard from industry, to then hear from the government's own key contacts with business and industry, we're very fortunate. So please welcome her.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think we're remiss of me not to mention we've got the previous MP for Wealden in the audience, Charles Hendry there, who's a fantastic mentor of mine. Charles, I'm sorry, I just had to embarrass you this morning. But where Jim ended on Warsaw, I am going to begin. Jim was reflecting on a task force that we have set up in the UK because we've signed a memorandum with Ukraine on the physical critical reconstruction of Ukraine. And this task force is chaired by myself and the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Kubrikov. And what we are able to do is provide practical support, not just post-conflict, but mid-conflict, as Jim has mentioned. Our next series of meetings will be taking place in November. Jim just reminded me just now, so me trying to get to terms with my diary. But Mark, we have been working very closely with our Ukrainian partners. In June, we held the Ukrainian Recovery Conference, and we did not want this conference to be just another a conference around a pledge of sums of money, which we know are of course, incredibly vital. As the Minister responsible for the reconstruction of critical infrastructure, I wanted it to be a conference where we could showcase 1 year on, when Germany holds the conference, what we have done as the UK partner. And that meant setting up a tech bridge. Mark, we are working with a number of tech firms in the UK who are working with Ukrainian firms to do a number of things, to basically skill up people in Ukraine, to enable new startups in Ukraine, also to help them export too. We also wanted to do a business-to-business network, and this is a bit like a dating service, Mark, where we've got, that's the most polite way of putting it, but it's a bit like we've got 500 UK businesses on a platform that can work with not only Ukrainian businesses, but with Ukrainian government and enabling them to fulfill their commitments and their procurement in rebuilding in Ukraine, mid-conflict, not just post-conflict. Can I make sure that's on the record? So a number of initiatives there. But my labour of love for the Ukrainian conference, I think the ambassador will be speaking about that, was to deliver a framework on war risk insurance. And you've got a huge history in the conflicts that you've worked in previously. I was across Afghanistan and Iraq, and of course there were very different situations when it comes to failed states, but there was never a war risk insurance in place to support, for me, it's UK firms going into Ukraine now and supporting mayors, deputy prime ministers in putting in place their master plans for their countries to be able to be built back better. And a number of these people responsible for the redevelopment of their regions have a fantastic idea. They obviously want their area to be built back as a centre for science expertise, or could be nuclear, but they just don't know where to begin, and they don't want that work to start post-conflict, because that could be some way off, but mid-conflict. So we are working with, within the task force with the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine in providing that practical support, whether it's the professional business services, the architectural services, but also physical reconstruction as well. And the war insurance is one component that has never existed before, unless I'm mistaken, that can now be used to help in that endeavour. There are a couple of challenges, and Ambassador, in the most respectful way, that I'll put this across. Issues obviously around governance, issues around transparency, and issues around accountability. We need to give the confidence to firms, UK firms in particular, that they are able to procure these contracts and ensure these contracts are followed through and they can reflect on the whole programme of work and how the funding takes place. Some anxiety how contracts will be managed is a bit of an issue, but this is why we are working within the task force to make sure that there is a standardised process in ensuring all that money that's been placed to Ukraine can be spent appropriately. The last time I caught up on my final point with the at the task force, there was a huge amount of enthusiasm, particularly for UK firms, because they have felt that we've been with them throughout the whole conflict, and they have huge faith in the standards that we have, and they feel that we are a much easier country to work with. Having said that, I am anxious that we are going to be providing all the support that's needed to enable them to put their procurement processes in place, and we may lose out to other countries like France, for example. So we need to make sure that we have UK firms there bidding well, bidding strong, enabling Ukraine to build back. So, Mark, I think we have a good story to tell. We've now got to, the next meeting's in November, and as I said to Jim, I want to see actual practical results on which firms are doing what work in what part of the country and what they are building back. But it's an endeavour that will continue for many months and years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, of course, ladies and gentlemen, it would be absolutely wrong to be having a conversation about Ukraine without Ukraine. And I think it's very, very common, sadly, that we see all sorts of discussions, be it on politics and policy, be it armchair generals, be it, I'm not even going to use, they would describe themselves as realists, so I would say unrealists who decide to get out a big map and start trying to carve up someone else's country. But if we are here to talk today about what Ukraine is doing and needs now, how we can be a supporter and ally to Ukraine now and in the future, and what Ukraine's, those dreams I said earlier that deserve to be fulfilled, this country should seek to help Ukraine to do, then it's very important that we, of course, rightly have a voice from Ukraine on today's panel. And we could not hope for a more illustrious one. We're very glad to be joined by Edward Fesco, the acting ambassador of Ukraine to the United Kingdom. I can only imagine how busy your agenda is, not just at this conference, but all the time. So we're very, very grateful you spared the time for this panel. He previously has represented Ukraine at the OSCE, the United Nations and NATO. So Conservative Home was obviously the natural next on the list. So please give him a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Mark, for such a wonderful introduction, and thank you to Conservative Home for inviting me here, because this is something that we really are keen to talk about the construction. When we talk about the construction, and as it was mentioned by Minister Ghani, we had the conference in June, but that conference was mostly long-term, strategic rebuilding. What we have right now, the situation looks like the war is not going to be over tomorrow. And since it's not going to be over tomorrow, Ukraine has to be self-reliant, self-sufficient, independent economically, and the work has to start now. Because if we wait till the fighting is over, we will lose precious time. A lot of precious time has been lost, as you all know, on the issues of weapons deliveries. So that's why it is so critical that this kind of financial insurance, that the UK is a pioneer that can be provided, that can assist us in ensuring that Ukraine products can go outside to the external markets so that we can continue as a state and that we can continue fighting, because the fight is basically on the two fronts, militarily and economically. You mentioned a little bit about infrastructure rebuilding. In Ukraine right now, we have 20,000 kilometers of roads destroyed. That's how much? That's 70-something times distance between London and Manchester. That's how much we need to start working on right now to make sure that logistics is working, to make sure that vehicles are moving back and forth, and that without even mentioning the damage that has been done to Ukrainian Black Sea ports. So this aspect, infrastructure, transport, is a crucial one. The other area, construction itself. The scale of destruction is unimaginable. Only people who have been to Ukraine can feel it. We have lost, you can say, over 300,000 apartments. That's people without homes, without their livelihoods. So where do they live? How they manage? So this kind of challenge is an enormous one. And it's only a tiny bit in terms of the residential buildings. What about industrial buildings? What about plants, factories? They're being hit every day. So that's construction. That's the area where we will need a lot of expertise, assistance, and we appreciate it very much that you guys are helping with that. The other area, agriculture. And agriculture is linked with a theme that is very familiar to all of us here, demining. Over 100,000 square kilometers of territory is contaminated. It's more than Wales. And all this land is taken out of productive use. So that's where we will need also outside help to make sure that we keep on rolling. Then there are other areas where we can work together. IT. UK is one of the biggest consumers of Ukrainian IT expertise. And we have to be working on that to build our links stronger, more robust, so that we can become more technologically advanced. Because what we are doing right now, we are trying to rebuild Ukraine, but we are not rebuilding the old Ukraine with an old industrial base. We're building a technologically advanced, forward-looking Ukraine. And that's where our priorities align. And I think that's why we move basically in sync with the United Kingdom. Yeah. And Mark mentioned that Ukraine is an eastern flank of the West. When we rebuild Ukraine, we have to make sure that Ukraine is politically, militarily, economically is part of the West, so that we do away with all this nonsense about buffer zones, bridges between East and West, about so-called areas of influence, because that kind of approach, that's what got us to the situation where we are. So, I'll shut up here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And our fourth and final speaker on the panel, again, will be familiar to many of you. Again, a great friend of Conservative Home, for which we're always very grateful. Alicia Cairns has been the Member of Parliament for Rutland since 2019. She's now, of course, also chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and her background before entering politics was in international security, counter-disinformation and counter-extremism. So please give her a very warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I think what's really positive is that all of us are coming from the same hymn sheet. So I'm going to touch on some similar points, but also some wider ones. Look, it's very clear from the Recovery Conference that the will is there. You know, the private sector, public sector appetite to invest in Ukraine is absolutely there. But actually, it is the job of government to unlock that private enterprise, to make the conditions possible for businesses to go in. And I have to say, the war risk insurance was absolutely game-changing. All the conversations we've had over the last year with businesses saying we want to do it, but the risks are so great. So I have to say enormous credit to the government on that. But I'd also like to say on the point of rebuilding, the fact it needs to start now, in Ukraine, we have been on the ground rebuilding the bridges that have been destroyed on which Ukrainian trains need to ship weapons and systems across Ukraine. We have been out there rebuilding. So when anyone says to you it's too early to rebuild, it's not a question of if, it is a question of fact. It is already happening, and it's so important that we keep doing that. The UK can help Ukraine in so many ways, but it is key about that investor confidence. So skills development for me is something where the UK can really be helping. We've all seen Ukrainian MPs on our TV speaking fluent English. What you don't know is those same MPs, and Lesia and Dimitri are both going to be here over the next few days, so please do go and speak to them. They're also speaking fluent French on French TV, fluent German on German and Austrian TV. We have a highly educated and highly motivated population across Ukraine, and what we need to do is help them align their capabilities with a modern economy. That is where the gap currently exists. That would be attractive to investors, and it's something that I believe that we can do. The next point has been touched on, but judicial reform and corruption. We have to give enormous credit to Zelensky and his regime. Whilst being at war, they are pursuing reform on these areas that we have asked them to do. Very few countries would say that they were willing to do that sort of level of reform whilst at the same time having an enemy on their shores. We know that investors do need to have confidence for them to be able to invest, but this is something that the UK does around the world time and time again, and it's something I want to see us do more in Ukraine. The next point is what I would consider the broadest form of rebuilding, and one that few people think of when they talk about reconstruction, and that's accountability and justice. The reality is that a traumatized society cannot rebuild unless it is given the chance to heal, to see justice done. And this is something that we failed to see in the Balkans. The amount of people who live with trauma still because we didn't allow them to have a conversation about it, we didn't allow them to talk about it, we didn't think about the psychosocial recovery that needs to take place. So as part of that, the UK needs to lead conversations around sexual assault. I remember when I brought those 4 Ukrainian female MPs to UK 4 weeks into the war, and I said to them, why aren't we talking about sexual violence? And they said, well, we've only had maybe 10, 15 reports so far. And I said, if you've had 10 to 15 people brave enough to report it, that means you're in the hundreds. How many children have you had reported already as rape victims? They said, well, we've had 2 at this point. Well, that means we're in the tens. This is a society that needs to be helped to tackle the stigma of rape, because the reality is that before this, there were still too many polls in Ukraine that said that rape was just something that happens to people. We need to support that society. We also need to do something now to prevent the levels of trauma that are getting worse every day with the kidnapping of children. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian children have been stolen and kidnapped and taken to a concentration camp in Crimea. The so-called adoption stories you see on the media are not what is happening. Crimea is 2 things: a military base from which Ukraine is being pounded on a daily basis targeting civilian sites, and a concentration camp for children, where they are not just told, learn a new language and focus differently and sing Russian songs. They are being given new names. They are being tortured physically if they do not do what is asked of them. We need to be working as the UK to help get these people home. And we need to make sure that through the ICC we get the criminal prosecutions that communities need. Justice needs to be seen not just in The Hague, if that's where people want to do it, but also in Ukraine. We need to see Ukrainian families facing down those people who harm them and their families and seeing the justice they deserve. Now, on the point of demining, I want to just go on to this a bit more because I think it's such an urgent, practical concern. Mines are the ultimate enemy of reconstruction. You cannot rebuild, and they're an obstacle time and time again. 40% of Ukrainian territory is covered in mines, and aside from the obvious human cost, it does prevent economically being productive. I was in Ethiopia and Somaliland only 3 weeks ago. They are still clearing mines from 20 years ago. Vast swathes of land that should be being used for agricultural are not, because they cannot, because people are dying on those fields. The Russians use mines. This is one of their key tactics. They mine and they mine and they mine again. We have to do more on this, and if we don't, it will choke Ukraine's recovery, and it will choke the support of the global south, who claim that they are still not getting what they need from the Ukrainian breadbasket. Finally, one thing I really believe in is that we need to see a green Marshall Plan for Ukraine. I've been calling for this since a few months into the renewed illegal invasion. Russia has inflicted untold ecological damage on Ukraine, whether it be the Kakova Dam or whether it be beyond that. And Zelensky recognises that a reconstruction ambition for Ukraine has to be that it becomes a clean energy hub. Now, few people realise that Ukraine has the potential to produce 30% of biomethane requirements of the whole of Europe. It also has the highest wind generation possibilities of any European country. And I call them a European country very purposely. And it is good that today the EU is meeting in Ukraine. It is the first time the EU has ever met outside of an official member state. So we do need to make sure that we help Ukraine become this green energy hub, because it will reduce the collective reliance on Russia, it will help us get to net zero, it will help us do what we want to do. And the final point I would just make is, if we really believe in reconstruction, helping Ukraine rebuild, that means making sure that we limit how much they have to rebuild. We have to stop giving Ukraine just enough to get to the next 3 months or 6 months. Any of you who run businesses in this room, if I said to you, I'll give you just enough to survive the next 3 months, you tell me to jog on. You would say, absolutely not. I cannot plan for my people. I cannot plan for our future. We have to give them what they need, also ahead of any potential US election outcome that is not what we want. So I would say we need to give Ukraine what they need now. We need to help them bounce back in terms of providing that commercial landscape. We need to help them do a green investment plan, but we have to remember the healing also comes from a psychosocial ability to rebuild your country. And I'm really proud of what we're doing, but there is a lot more that we can do starting today.
Thank you. Now, a huge amount of expertise on the panel, raising a huge amount of food for thought in this essential discussion. I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of questions from the audience. A couple of house rules, ladies and gentlemen. As usual, if you're selected for a question, please wait for one of my colleagues to reach you with a microphone. Please say who you are. And if you make a speech rather than a question, I will boo you until you sit back down, because that's not what everyone's here to hear. So questions only, please. Who would like to first? The lady here.
Hello, my name is Maria Timofienko. I'm from the Conservative Friends of Ukraine. First of all, I would like to thank the Conservative Home for putting together such an excellent panel of such devoted supporters and friends of Ukraine. Thank you. I've just come back from Ukraine, where we have attended a forum on defense manufacturers, and we have heard from the Secretary of State, Grant Shapps, about the support that the government of the UK is going to provide for defense manufacturers to come and set up their operations in Ukraine. This is really key, because if we provide the weapons to Ukraine that they need, we will have less to reconstruct and less to rebuild afterwards. My question is, we've met a lot of companies there, both the UK companies and Ukrainian companies. What support does the government practically provide to the defense manufacturers that want to set up their operations in Ukraine? Will there be war guarantees, that war insurance guarantees that is available to them? And also on the way to the UK, there are many manufacturers from Ukraine that would like to work together with the UK manufacturing sector, set up R&D here. It will be very helpful if the government could assist them in setting up operations in the UK. Thank you very much. I would be grateful for your
Thank
thoughts.
you. And I'll take a second question. We'll go down the panel for two. I see a former member of the European Parliament right here.
Thank you, Mark. Ashley Fox, candidate for Bridgewater. This spring, the House of Commons debated Chris Bryant's bill on the seizure and use of Russian state assets. What do the panel think of that? Can we use those seized assets not just to support Ukraine, but also other victims of Russian theft and aggression? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start with the ambassador on those questions.
I'll start with the latter question. because it's an easier one to answer. Yes, absolutely. The Russian assets outside of Russia, I think these are the ones that should be used to finance reconstruction, because it's not the UK taxpayer, it's the Russian taxpayer that has to carry the burden. And there are issues, legalistic issues that in different countries governments raise about touching sovereign assets, but it's more about political will than about any legal procedure, because there were already officially suggestions on using interest on assets to use for reconstruction to finance Ukraine, but fundamentally, what is the difference between seizing an interest and seizing the body? There is none. So it's all about the political will, and I hope we will get to the point when there will be not a debate, but a decision on that. And on the question from our Ukrainian colleague, definitely, you must know that BA system is already in Ukraine. They're setting up production facilities, and the Ukrainian government is very much interested in ensuring that foreign companies are coming to Ukraine to manufacture what is needed in terms of the armaments, in terms of equipment, and they're all welcome. And if you've been to the defense conference, which was held, I believe, last Friday, it was quite a successful one. So we're looking forward to having it, the decision, the discussions being implemented on the ground.
Thank you very much. Minister.
Thank you. Well, it's very hard for me to disagree with the ambassador, but on the issue of sanctions, we are in a new phase or new place, and a lot of this work could be progressed much faster, but we're learning as the conflict continues. My role as the Business and Trade Minister, I do take care of sanctions when it comes business that are linked to Russia, and I must say it isn't as straightforward as you think, because not all the European countries where this trade flows through has the same sanction standards as we do. And I do my best to investigate every potential issue that comes in front of me that I could sanction, but it's curious how there are back routes into the UK, and I'm doing my best to work with my European counterparts. I've also set up an office for sanctions within my department, because it was a whole new set of casework, just so that we could be far more front-footed on this. So hopefully there'll be no doubt more work on that, even if it isn't by Chris. I'm sure Alicia will be leading it, no doubt, going forward. And as for our wonderful Ukrainian friend in the audience, absolutely, we've got over 500 UK firms engaged in mid-conflict work at the moment, including manufacturing, and that'll touch on defence too. At the conference in June, there was over £60 billion committed to Ukraine, and we made a substantial commitment, several billion as well. So that work is taking place. Tim talked about the event in Warsaw in November. I'll be back out there with another delegation of businesses, construction, architects, defence, tech, skills. So it's an umbrella of firms that we work in there. Yes, there is also help for Ukrainian firms to secure finance in the UK, to link up with other like-minded firms in the UK too. That is the business bridge and the tech bridge that we have set up within the Department for Business and Trade, so that work continues. Also, I see Ashley's in the audience. I think he was trying to raise a question, but Ashley, you take care of the Ukraine-Britain Business, is it group? Council. So there's already connections that are taking place as well. There's always a huge amount of enthusiasm. I must say I've met hundreds of Ukrainian business people and investors and vice versa. It does thin out, though, when it comes down to the practicalities, how we're going to try and get this work done. So we now need to provide the support to take people through the whole process, so they can either work in the UK or we ensure that UK firms are working in Ukraine.
Alicia Kearns.
Very briefly, on the defence point, look, Babcock opened their office for the first time in Ukraine last week. We are seeing continual progress. We need to be part of this conversation, because Ukraine is going to have the most well-armed and well-equipped military of anyone in Europe, probably, by the end of this war. Because we are looking realistically another 1 to 3 years of this. It is not going to end tomorrow, as much any of us would wish to, and that's because we are not giving the support that is needed across the world to make that possible. And that is why Ukraine is making itself now self-sufficient. They will make sure that they have the defence industrial complex that they need within their own country, because they don't want to have to rely on us around the world, because they can't be confident it will continue, which is really disappointing, because that's a reflection on us and not on them. Very briefly on the seas point, the wider point is that we still need to clean Russian money out of London. There is still a problem. The Foreign Affairs Committee has led on this conversation since 2019. There needs to be more and more done to clean up Russian money. The point about why we need it to be Russian money repaying is absolutely right, because we need to keep taxpayers across all of Europe and the US on side, and therefore having Russian money repay it is far better than our money doing it. There is a genuine problem around property laws. The UK has some of the best property laws in this country. This is not something we want to water down, but that is where we come a cropper with the seizing and not just freezing of money. However, the point I make to the government time and time again is we are legislators and we need to change the law. Tell me what laws we need to change and I will lay an amendment, or we will get it done and we will do it. And the frustration thing for me is that the will is there within Parliament. It is absolutely there. So tell us what we need to change and we will do it in a way that is sensible, protects our property laws, but also recognising that going forward we have to make sure that time and time again, when dictators and those who support them think that they can come and take sovereignty through violence, there will be repercussions and we will come for all their backers. Because without their financial backers, you'll suddenly find they're all far less willing to go on these sorts of murderous tirades across the world.
An open invitation there, Minister, for your colleagues to get drafting.
On the first point, in terms of defence manufacture, happy to help, always happy to help. I think the interesting thing about the early stages of that in terms of its design is that can be done anywhere in the world remotely using the digital platforms that have been talked about. So it's not simply a question of being physically present. There's a lot that can be done now before people are gearing up for that, and we're gearing up to reopen offices and all sorts of things, but we don't have to wait for that. That can happen. I'm no expert on the law, as many people will attest to, but in terms of Ashley's question, I mean, it strikes me, listening to what Alicia said, I mean, why don't we use that to focus on crimes, mines, veterans and their families? Because surely that is something that most people will be able to rally around. It would strike me as politically neutral and just needs a bit of will and a bit of heft, and actually would make a very positive difference.
Certainly. Now, let's take another round of questions. The two ladies on either side of the aisle at the back there, please.
Hello, I'm Julie. I work for ActionAid UK, and we're a charity that specialises in rebuilding after humanitarian emergencies, be it conflict, be it environmental crises. It's so fantastic that the UK is taking such a leading role in supporting Ukraine post and during the conflict to build back via economic growth, and especially focusing on business growth. But as we know, businesses and the business sector is very male-dominated, and I just wanted to kind of ask about how we're going to ensure we're also supporting women, the majority of Ukraine's population, when we're building back through business.
Thank you. If you just pass the microphone across the aisle. Oh, you got one. Excellent.
Hi, Jill Lawless from the Associated Press. Can I just ask a blunt question, which is, I mean, you mentioned the need to give Ukraine what it needs because the outcome of the US election is uncertain. Are you concerned about the Americans even before that they might be going a bit soft and won't be there when Ukraine needs them?
Thank you both for those questions. I'm going to come to the Minister first.
So thank you so much from the lady. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Julie from ActionAid. So when we had the reconstruction conference in June, I deliberately went through the programme to make sure that we had Ukrainian female representatives, not only on panels, were a core part of conversations across the whole spectrum, not just the issues that one would assume that are female-led when it comes to dealing with mental health, social issues, but also on nuclear power too. So I made sure the platforms were as even as they could be, and actually a number of panels were just female-led completely. As well as the 500 businesses, we have 130 NGOs involved as well. So when I talk about business to business, it's about businesses building back schools, hospitals, mental health institutions. It's not just core business as you would see it. But I have gone out of my way and will continue to go out of my way, including at the next meeting in Norway, to make sure the female voices are heard. And can I just put on the record, they don't need to be asked. Ukrainian women are lions. They are there, vocal, experienced, and will be involved. They will not be held back. So do not worry about that whatsoever. Thank you. Thank you.
I would absolutely echo all of that. If I could speak for my own company, arguably the most enthusiastic part of our business has been the female women part of the business who want to help and want to get involved. It's not a question of forcing or encouraging, it's creating the conditions, almost stopping, which is, whoa, hang on, now let's get this right. And my background has been working with NGOs in all sorts of forms for the last 40 years, and I'm a chair of a charity, so I kind of know that, and I know the issue, and certainly the Ukrainian women we've employed recently are absolutely the driving force behind it. So again, I certainly wouldn't worry about that if that is a concern. It's the opposite. It's about creating the opportunities for them. I think a lot we can do is through education and training and development from the diaspora all over the world, so maybe funding and supporting engineering degrees or whatever specialist degrees. And it's got to go beyond, if I may, the immediate reconstruction, which is the sort of shelters and basics into the long term. And working with schools, working with education bodies is something that we're working on at the moment.
Lisa.
So I think on the women point, it is absolutely key that we look at education, but also we do need to look at microfinance, and we need to look at making sure that we support the Ukrainian government to roll out the programs they will want to do, particularly in liberated areas. There's a phrase, an idiom that we all know, teach a man to fish and he'll feed himself for a lifetime. Teach a woman to fish and she'll feed a village for a lifetime. There is a difference. And so we need to make sure that we are investing in women-led businesses. And yes, Ukrainian women are absolute lions. But I would go back to the point I made in my speech, that women, but also men and children, are going to need a lot of support. And we have to make sure, and I'm going to go back to the Balkans again, what happened was, despite the rape of 90,000 women in the Balkans, and in Ukraine we are also seeing men and children being raped, when it came to rebuilding their societies, and obviously it was different in Srebrenica because there were no men left, but the women in particular were forced to put their trauma to one side. We cannot allow that to happen, because you cannot be a fully productive member of society if that's the case. And on the question from AP about the US, look, I took a delegation of 4 other chairs of foreign affairs committees to Washington in May because I was worried about the US checking out. We were all worried. We were representing Poland, Lithuania, and other kind of Baltic musketeers, as they call themselves. And essentially we went and we met with every single possible group on the Hill. And in every single meeting, they looked at us like we were mad, that we were deluded. Why were we worried that the US was going to check out of Ukraine? And it finally got to about the 4th meeting on the day where one of the senators said, guys, if even the Brits are telling us they're worried, maybe we should listen to them. Maybe there is a problem, because our sole point was to try and get the US to put in place support for Ukraine now, so that regardless of election outcome, we've done what we've needed, not least because we should be stepping up now more than ever, rather than delaying things again. Biden has been very clear overnight after the budget that he is going to make sure that another aid package passes. I do believe the US will live up to its commitments currently. I do believe long-term the US will as well, because regardless of Trump, a lot of the things he said he was going to do before he was elected the first time, he never actually did. He actually delivered on some of the things we forced him to do. I am nervous about the future of the US, but at this point in time, I do think they will deliver on their commitments, and I hope we see that, and people like me will be ringing our counterparts on the Hill to make sure they do everything they should be doing for Ukraine.
Ambassador.
Thank you. On the women and support, let's just say that there are millions of Ukrainian women outside of the country right now, and hundreds of thousands of them are here in the UK. And what they are doing, they're acquiring new skills, they're learning the language if they don't know the language, and quite a few of them, I have spoken to quite a number, are going back to Ukraine to work there. So there is an indispensable role for them to play, and they will have to play it, because wars take a heavy toll on the male part of the population, and the Ukrainian women will have to be upfront when the war is over, and I am confident that they will do the best And because I will not argue with any assessment of Ukrainian women that we've heard here. Then on the US and support the issue, for the Ukrainian government, the first, the second, and the third concern is to have sufficient resources to fight the war. And in different countries, the situation is different. Different governments, different political considerations. And with the US, as Alicia mentioned, President Trump, I will just remind you, that was the one who approved during his tenure supply of javelins to Ukraine, and at that time it was deemed extremely dangerous. But as you see, the sky did not fall. So, is there a concern? Probably. Is this an issue that all our partners and the Ukrainian government is working on? Absolutely. And the Ukrainian government is working with the Republicans, with Democrats, with the current administration to make sure that we have the US support, not the party support, but the US support. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm very keen to make sure we fit in some more questions in the last few minutes available to us. So anyone I come to, please make it very brief. There's a question at the back there, and then there's been a very patient question here.
Thank you. Stefan Boscher from Politico. My question is directed to Mr. Ghani. You mentioned before how you were, overseeing sanctions. Just wanted to ask what's happening with the £3 billion the government got from the Chelsea sale. I believe that unless anything's changed in the last few weeks, that money still isn't in the fund that should be that has been set up to aid the Ukrainian recovery. So yeah, what's happening with that? Cheers.
Thank you. Charles Hendry, Nusrat's far less illustrious predecessor as MP for Wealdon and former Minister for Energy. Can I pick up on Alicia's point about green energy? Given the devastation that's been wrought on Ukraine's energy system, to what extent can clean energy provide for the short-term needs of recovering Ukraine? Or will it also need investment in the huge gas reserves which Ukraine has? And question for Nuz in that regard, that the UK government has not historically in recent years been sympathetic or supportive to British companies involved in hydrocarbon activity overseas. Will it look to amend that position, even if only for Ukraine, to enable such investment to take place?
And as the Chelsea question was for one specific panellist, thank you, I'll see if we got a final question we could fit in. Yes, thank you very much, Jessica.
Thank you very much. My name is Bernd Weibitz. I'm the Austrian ambassador. But in my previous job, I was the humanitarian director of Austria, and Ukraine is still one of the biggest humanitarian emergencies globally. And we're discussing forward-leaning things like reconstruction, but in the present moment, humanitarian assistance, including psychosocial support, including demining, is still an essential part of our work with Ukraine. Could you maybe elaborate what the UK plans are on this side? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll start with you, Jim.
Energy?
Let me do green energy first then. How about that? As Charles raised it, and it's not the specific. It's going to be a compromise, it's going to be a balance, but the trend and the rapid trend should be towards green renewables in all forms. But we shouldn't, in personal view, set back the development and reconstruction of a country because we are not going to look at all sources of power and energy. So I think there's a sensible compromise there, and also technology can do an awful lot to remove some of the threat and harm that perhaps old conventional energy sources can provide. I think that's in terms of the humanitarian point, other than agreeing entirely with it, and absolutely from bitter personal experience, but more widely, if we don't tackle the mines and the battlefield damage and the likelihood of asbestos all over the place, then frankly we're not going to make the progress we need, and we need to tackle that, particularly as those are going to be in the most sensitive areas where redevelopment is going to be most visible and most needed. So early investment in that. And there is an awful lot that technology can do and can help. It's not simply the old school of dealing with it. There are modern techniques which we need to be investing and thinking about, and maybe some form of international response to that now would be helpful.
Thank you. Alicia Kearns.
So on the green energy point, I just said the exact same. I'm not going to lecture a war-torn country on what they need to do to rebuild when it was the collective failure of Europe to prevent this war in the first place. We saw it coming. We could have stopped it. When I went to Ukraine 10 days before the renewed illegal invasion started, I sat down with ambassadors from across the world and across Europe who told me that our intelligence was wrong and it wasn't going to happen. And a lot of it was based on sheer arrogance and wanting to see the future that they thought. So I'm not going to lecture Ukraine. We're going to let them rebuild however they need. But the renewables potential is their long-term strategic opportunity, and particularly as they come into the EU, there's enormous benefits from it. On psychosocial support, all I'd say is this is something the UK is very good at, it's something we have done in other places in the world, and I want to see us proactively push it as something we are going to do. I myself am going to try and really push that focus on children over the next few months, but let's go back to William Hague's focus on sexual war crimes. He was absolutely right, and we should be doing more of that around the world. And I'm really pleased to hear you speak in particular, Ambassador from Austria, because we need all of our European allies completely aligned behind us. And I've been able to secure the agreement of 6 Austrian MPs to come with me to Ukraine in the next few months, because I do want to change the narrative that we are seeing in some capitals, and the outcome in Slovakia should worry us all. What the Ukrainian parliament does incredibly is they divide up their MPs so that different MPs target different countries to build relationships with them. It's incredible the way they operate, but we need to be making sure that we are doing the same thing, because every single country needs to recognise that this is a chance to make a stand for the next 50 years, and we have to deter today, because we are failing to deter in Kosovo and in Bosnia. We fail to deter in Ukraine. At the moment, we are not doing enough to deter in Taiwan either.
Minister, there are some specific questions for
Thank
you.
you. For Stefan's question at the back, Stefan, that doesn't fall within my brief, so I'm going to have to get back to you on that. You've stumped me, I'm afraid. And to Charles, you're absolutely right. Actually, I think what Alicia and Jim said, that there's going to have to be a mix. And I always try and make sure that I temper my language when I'm at the task force. It's not our job to turn up and tell them what they have to do. Our job is to help them put together a national plan that works for all the regions within Ukraine and doesn't involve us all overlapping and just basically wasting time clambering to get results that we won't achieve if we're not sharing best practice. So there will have to be a mix. If that is what the Ukrainians want, that is what they will procure for. Our job, if we want to be part of that process, to make sure that procurement process is as open and transparent as it can be. And if there are UK firms, there are UK firms. This is about Ukraine building back better, and our commitment in helping to do that at pace, and obviously getting that work done mid-conflict too. As the question from our Austrian friend in the audience, I'm surprised that this wasn't more front and centre at the last conference. Perhaps it may be at the next conference. Some topics, even though they are the most simple, are the most difficult to discuss. And there will have to be an international response to this, a coordinated response. And I will actually ensure that at our next meeting in November, that we ask that the Germans who are hosting the conference next put this far more at the top table.
Thank you. And Ambassador.
Thank you. Very shortly, on the green energy. Before the war or before the invasion, we had a thriving sector in wind energy, solar energy, but lots of it was lost to the fighting, and lots of it was in the areas that are right now under occupation. And to put it bluntly, even if we rebuild it right away, it will not satisfy all the energy need. So there has to be a balance between developing these new energy sources and using the old one, but using new technologies like micronuclear reactors, new, more efficient turbines to generate electricity. So it will not happen just like a switch, but what will be rebuilt will be based on the modern technology, which is more friendly to the environment. And on the humanitarian assistance, as the ambassador was saying, it's a whole area in itself. It's impossible just to cover it, because we have touched on some points, but just think for a minute about the medical issues, about prosthetics. How many people have lost their limbs? And just this area for civilians, for military, and it's not just prosthetics themselves, but also psychological support for people who have such a trauma. So there is, I think, if we are talking about a recovery conference, there can be a conference just on that subject to cover all aspects, because it is, as you said rightly, is such a deeply profound issue to be addressed, and it's just impossible to cover just in one go. So, but thank you for your concern.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to leave you with one image from last year. During the celebrations for the late Queen's Jubilee, I found myself in a queue at Hampton Court Palace, and in front of us were two Ukrainian ladies who'd recently arrived in the United Kingdom with their children. And as my children played with their children, I asked them, what's the welcome been like? Have people been kind to you? Have there been any problems arriving in the United Kingdom? And they took me rather by surprise, because everyone's been lovely. We're so grateful for the welcome everyone's given us. But registering for school and library and the doctor, why does everything in the UK need to use paper? In Ukraine, we do everything by app. This is a digital thing. We're not used to why we have to do all these forms and send them back and forth. And I think we've heard today a huge amount of good reason to have. I have great faith and great confidence that those ladies and their children will be able to return in safety to a free and victorious Ukraine, a Ukraine which will be already on the road to rebuilding. They will play a great part in rebuilding their nation, but I fully foresee that their children will come back to this country to teach us how to do it better as well. So thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to Alexei Goncharenko for his video message from Odessa, to Jim Bowden, to Nusrat Ghani, to Edward Fesco, to Alicia Cairns. Thank you to ACOM for their kind partnership on this event. Thank you to the team at Conservative Home, and thank you to all of you for watching. Thank you.